welcome back. I've got David Dilger on the line. David, great to be with you today. How are you?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks for having me along.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, why don't you share a little bit about you and the work you do, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, so look, I started out as a lawyer, then I moved into some corporate roles, was a national HR manager and then a CEO of a bakery franchise, then back into the law. And then my business partner and I started Edge Legal. And Edge Legal was born out of one single premise. We said, we want to work with managers that we would like our kids to work for because both of us like spend a lot of time in courtrooms and we see the nasty end of things, and we're saying there has to be a better way. We want to work with managers so they can set up the workplaces that they're happier in and that their people are happier in as well.
That's one thing I've seen throughout my career is there's just so many managers out there that maybe not so much their fault, but they have to take a little bit of ownership on it. Is they don't know what they're doing. They've never received any training on how to be a manager, how to manage people, how to work with people. In many cases, they were promoted into that role because they were really good at what they did as far as their job. But when it comes to management, that is a completely different skill set, and they feel just like they're on a lost island, and people, when they're lost or they feel threatened, the amygdala kicks in, and who knows what their reactions are going to be.
Yeah, look, I think Michael Gerber, in his famous book, The E-Myth, really nailed this when he goes, you get three types of people. You get the technician, you get the manager, and you get the entrepreneur. Everyone wants you to be all three, and it's rare that you can do it. And exactly what happens is you alluded to earlier, you get these, good technicians promoted into a job, so-called managing our organization's greatest asset with no skill to do it. And I'd say this to a lot of managers. The biggest issue I see, um, all of the popular media focuses on the obnoxious boss. And we would say that's probably only about 10%. That's the highlight reel, the news reel, the social media grab. 90% of the issues we see is avoidance behavior. And that is managers are more scared of doing anything. So they wait for things to either resolve, hope it will go away. And the high reality is it just doesn't. And that's where we see the bulk of the issues. So, for managers, I'm saying don't be scared to do something. Actually get in and do it rather than waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, it's a phrase we like to say is rip off the Band-Aid, because hoping that it's going to go away just allows that infection just to fester and get worse and worse, and we see it time and time again. I mean, yeah, there's a chance that something could change and the issue could resolve itself, but ideally you're better off to prevent it from escalating in the first place. And again, a lot of people just try to avoid it. They say no pain, but unfortunately, when you're dealing with humans in a workplace or anywhere, sometimes there's going to be some situations where you're going to have difficult conversations. You're going to have to address difficult things, and the more you lean into that, and as much as you don't like doing it, you actually get better in addressing challenges. I remember many years ago, I was working for an organization, and we were sent to crisis intervention training because we worked in an area that had high crime and a lot of vulnerable people and all of that. So there's always an opportunity that, there could be a situation that comes up that could be deemed a crisis. So we were all trained on how to look for it, the signs, how to protect yourself, how to stabilize the situation and whatnot. And I don't think my children liked me using it as much because they were the guinea pigs. I picked on them all the time to kind of sort out their battles with themselves. But what I find in many organizations is a lot of the problems that get big easily could have been avoided.
Yeah, Bob Sutton, professor out of Stanford, gives a real highlight into what we should be watching for, and that is your team watches you about 8 times more than a manager thinks They do. So the reality is when you come in and you're having a bad day, or they're going, look, stay away from Mike today, he's in a bad mood, or he's not yes today, Mike, he's no today, Mike, all of those things. People as groups are highly intuitive to what their manager is dealing with. And so they need to understand two really important things. For you to be effective, your team first must trust you before you can use the value of your competence. And Amy Cuddy, in her fantastic book, Presence, focused on this. And she said, from an evolutionary perspective, the main thing that actually made you successful and a survivor was that people trusted you. Yet in today's workforce, managers tend to focus on their competence. I've got an MBA, I'm your leader, I was promoted, I've done this management training. And the reality is that's a secondary consideration to people. First, they need to go, do you have my best interests at heart? And if they don't have that, you will be an ineffective leader because you just don't have the first precondition of effective management.
Well, we see it a lot, and there's been a lot of conversations in recent years, and we see, especially in North America, and probably around the world too. Especially around when the pandemic was going on, there was the Great Resignation because I think a lot of people recognized that they didn't like where they were working. And a phrase that we hear a lot more than we used to is psychological safety. You want to have a workplace that is safe, meaning you're not going to get robbed or held up at gunpoint or whatever. But the mental side of things is so critically important, because if you don't feel safe mentally, that you're going to be able to produce and do your job without being harassed by your management or by colleagues, or constantly pressured to perform when the organization's not giving you all the resources you need in order for you to be successful. It really causes a lot of problems for people. What are some of the things that you found when it comes to psychological safety, and how organizations are addressing it?
Yeah, look, I like Tim Clark, organizational psychologist, his methodology, and he says you've got to have four elements. Now, it's not linear, so I don't want people to think I just go through this quadrant, but he talks about the first one is people need to feel like they belong to something. That is, they don't need to feel like they're besties with everyone, but they do need to feel they belong, they identify with the organization, with the department, with the work group. The second one, you got to think about mistakes are okay. Now, you got all the work by Carol Dweck regarding, fixed mindset, growth mindset, all of that sort of stuff. And in a growth mindset, you go, we can recover from a mistake. In a fixed mindset, you treat it as misconduct and not as a performance issue. And basically then what you end up with is employees avoiding making mistakes, so then they avoid doing, rather than people saying, you know what, if we make a mistake, we'll fix it. I trust myself as a manager that I have the competency to get you over the line, and that will then flow on through the business. The third one is contributor safety. And I like Australian cricket coach John Buchanan talked about, you just got to look to how do teams work? You look to the left of you and you look to the right and you go, can I trust that person will do their job? And can I trust that person to do their job? And vice versa. Now the reality with that, if you are going, oh, gee, I've got to work with Mick, and I'll have to stay up, do overtime, I'll have to double check things. That's the type of thing that goes, I don't trust my teammates, and vice versa, someone's not trusting you. That will damage psychological safety. And then the fourth one is challenger safety. Sometimes everyone says, oh, we welcome your feedback, but really, does your organization allow you to put your hand up and say, wrong way, go back? Or are you going to be that criticized for that being that whistleblower, or the person who sticks their head above the parapet? You get all of those four in various sort of iterations, That's the basic way of heading towards psychological safety. But you've got to train your managers to deliver that. None of that just happens by, serendipity. It's one of those things you've really got to work at, and that's why you've got to start measuring it and start looking at it. We've been really great at doing physical safety, but it just crept up on us, and we understand that now, psychological claims cost you generally about 3 times as much to deal with as a physical injury, and they take about 4 times as long. And that's like if you posed any other risk to an organization, they would be all over that with those set of numbers. Yet we've seemed to have just lagged a little bit behind.
Well, one of the things that I've seen too over the recent years, and it's always been there, is, and you mentioned just a moment ago, is when employees do not feel safe because they're afraid of losing their job, they have bills to pay, they have to have food or housing, clothing, all of that. So they play small. They don't say anything, they don't speak up. So what that happens is organizations then, quite frankly, struggle and suffer because they're not making the best products and services that they could, or there could be a defect. We've seen that in many cases where something's not working right, or something could be a problem, and no one says anything, and then it gets released, and then you see auto accidents or plane crashes or you name it. There could be anything. And it all comes back to, you know, people are afraid to speak up. They're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And as a manager, your role is to, quite frankly, manage your people. And a lot of people think, well, manage by a stick, or gotta, rule with a strong fist. It's like, but we're starting to see, it's early yet, but a lot of organizations that I've seen that are doing well is that manager role is shifting, and it's taking on more of a sports type of manager or coach, where you are encouraging and training your people on the plays that they need to make in order for them to be successful, no matter what the sport is, whether it's football or cricket or the North American sports, whatever. So what I'm seeing is when these managers are more like a mentor or a guide to help the employee be the best that they can be, that's when you start seeing that trust factor come in. It shows that the manager actually cares about the individual, not just as an employee, but as a person, and understanding that they have all of the challenges that they have in their own personal life that they have to deal with on top of work. Uh, but when the organizations have people that are actually wanting their people to be better and taking the steps, and it doesn't cost a lot. It's not like, okay, we have to allocate 40% of our budget to train our employees. Well, maybe you do. You'll have a better product or service if you do that. But in many cases, just training these managers on how to basically nurture their employees, much like you would nurture a garden. You help them, you remove the roadblocks or the silos or the weeds in order for them to flourish and grow. When they do that, you're going to have a healthier workplace, and quite frankly, you're going to have a more productive one as well.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, I mean, Brene Brown said it best when she said, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And I've definitely seen a trend where employers and their managers have fallen into management double speak in a way of avoiding legal claims. So rather than, and like just the simplest example I can give you, if you go into any corporate kitchenette around any workplace, there's a sign up that says something like, hey, remember to put your dirty dishes away. The reality is it's 1 or 2 people that leave their dishes out, and no one's gone to Mick and said, Mick, put your dirty dishes away, right? It's disrespectful, and someone has to clean up behind you. And when we do that, what we do is we take away the agency of an individual to actually fix where the performance slippage is. And I like your analogy on the coach. because the problem where we've come to is we've tried to make this big same type approach. That is, apply your processes, apply everything exactly the same, when realistically it's got to be people first. You've got to know your people and the people that you manage in particular to actually work that out. And the law is on your side. So what we're trying to do is balance competency and care. And that is, we're going to be on a bit of a seesaw as a manager, and you're going to have to adjust it. So don't go to your cookie cutter and use the same playbook. And I've got a bit of a sort of a mud map for you. To actually know your people, this is where you need to start with. I need to know, when are you at your best? When do you shine? When are you in flow state? Then I need to know what you're actually good at and does it fulfill you? Because there's plenty of people who are good at stuff and they hate their job because they're stuck in it and they're going, yeah, I've got the golden handcuffs on and I just can't escape it. Now ask, what does actually fulfill you and are you good at it? Because there's plenty of things that you're not good at that actually fulfills you and it gives you joy. So a good example of that is I love playing an acoustic guitar and singing Australian classics. I'm not really good at it, but you know what? I like it. It fulfills me, and I'll keep on doing it. I'm not going to make a life choice to quit my job as a lawyer to take it up, but you know what I mean. And then we've got to know, what are the practices and the preferences of how we deal with each other. Some people want you just to barge into my office and tell me what's wrong and let's rip off the Band-Aid. Other people, they want you to send them an email with all the details so they can have a look at it. Some people say, don't ever call me. When you call me, I immediately panic, something's wrong. Other people go, you've got to get on the phone, send me a text. Whatever it is, work that stuff out with the individual, because if you don't, when you spook them, their amygdala has a biological response. And that biological response gives you 4 states: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Okay? It's not a choice. It's not being some type of snowflake. It's a biological thing that stops your logical brain from working effectively. It says, don't worry about the emotional regulation, just get through this point of danger. It impacts your immune system and it also impacts your memory. So when all of that's happening, there's no way that you can get through your message. Then the 5th one is, tell me about your past successful relationships, because I want to know, what did you do that made this work? Because relationships are a bit of adjustment on both sides. So what were the compromises you were prepared to make for your relationship? And then equally, tell me about a bad relationship and what didn't work there. Because it's an easy throwaway to go, oh, I had a bad boss and so it didn't work out. But I want to know, what did you do? Did you start avoiding that boss? Did you fight back against the boss? What caused this? And then finally, if we break this, how do we fix it? Let's work out what we will do when this breaks, right? And maybe in various states of breaking, but that will take away the angst and the amygdala response for when I turn up to your office and say, hey, Mick, let's go get a coffee. We already know that that's going to be a safe spot where you and I are in the team together and we're going to work our way through. If I'm going, or when David says, come and have a coffee, you get voted off the island Survivor style, that's the one where the worry starts. And that message, if you could get all of that with your employees, you can manage anyone from the extremes to the other extremes. High performers, low performers, people with mental health issues, people with physical issues who struggle with some type of work. If you knew all of that, you'd be better placed to start to manage your team psychosocially safer.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned, the voting off the island component of it, because that brings up a challenge that we see in a lot of organizations is, when it's time to say goodbye to, an employee for whatever reasons, and you obviously being in the legal field, see this all the time where organizations really do a bad job in how they handle the termination of an employee. There are some that do a really good job. They're very caring and they make it as graceful as they can. But many organizations they just botch it so much. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on organizations that are not terminating right, and what are some things that they need to do in order to they can avoid all the legal risks that come along with a wrongful termination.
Yeah, well, look, I'll go back to the great Bob Sutton again, and he's in his book Good Boss, Bad Boss, or I think in the States it's called the No Asshole Rule, which is a fantastic book. But he examines the metadata and he goes, what will happen is you'll get a poor performing employee who actually achieves their KPIs. And he calls them the toxic rock star, right? So they're the person that everyone knows. It's sort of like the naughty kid in the class. You go, who's the toxic rock star? And everyone knows. Usually except them and usually except their manager. But what he said, when you get a toxic rock star in your team, you will eventually plateau out on the performance. They are very good at ensuring their KPIs are met, but no one else's can achieve the types of levels that they should achieve. And then Bob Sutton says this. He said, once that plateaus out, you then get the pressure because everyone realizes, hey, manager, what are you doing about the toxic rock star? And then you screw your guts up a little bit and you finally terminate them. And then what will happen is the metadata shows you'll suffer a bit of a performance dip. But he said, like the stock market, you then rise above your previous high and exceed it because you've set an environment which is actually open for more people to thrive in. And that's what management's about, setting the environment so that the team can thrive, not just one individual. And ultimately, out of all of this, one of the other points you've got to ensure with terminations is it shouldn't be a surprise. Your team who are dealing with a toxic rock star want to know you're doing something, but equally, you don't get any value from just doing this, um, clandestine in the night type movement where I just go, Mick won't be here tomorrow. He's pursuing other opportunities. Everyone knows what's happened. Now, you might think, oh, they'll celebrate you, David. They'll go, thanks, manager, you fixed the problem. What that does, though, when it's not done professionally and consistently with the law, it actually puts people into an amygdala response because they say, well, if it happened to that person, it might happen to me. And when that's going on, the fear sets in. Again, the amygdala triggers, and you get either stuff that we've seen, which was the quiet resignation, which is people just sitting at their desk and holding firm to make sure they didn't do anything wrong. But the worst thing about that is they're not doing anything right. Or you get the embitterment where people strike back and then they have what I call the second job at the workplace, which is to complain to everyone else how much they hate this job. And when you get either of those two going on, you cannot get psychological safety.
And we see way too many organizations suffering from that. And, hopefully one day we won't, but I'm a realist and, we're always going to be challenged with these things, which is why it's important to have people like you in this world to help organizations navigate it. So love this conversation, David. Where can people find out more about you and this amazing work you're doing?
Probably the easiest way, you can find me on our website, which is www.edgelegal.com.au, or just look me up on LinkedIn. I normally write articles about managing this type of thing, and got some tips and trends for managers to look out for. So I'd love for people to look me up.
I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So, David, thanks again for your time today. Really appreciate it and loved our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.